Stories like this are best told over a good cup of chai or wine, but given the paucity of time, we'll run it through in about 6 to 7 minutes. Ashima, thanks so much for this opportunity. So I grew up with stories from my grandmother. The first story was about my South African educated grandfather. Grandmother would often talk about how handsome he was educated in South Africa, he was hardworking and had great handwriting. Then there was the story about my great-grandfather. Grandmother would say he returned from South Africa with a lot of money, but then he died a poor man in tragic circumstances. And she would say that great-grandfather used to say he met Gandhiji. And for a youngster growing up in Hyderabad, India, I couldn't connect the dots as to what was it about my great-grandfather, about earning money, and then about Gandhiji or South Africa, because my grandfather had died very young, when my dad was barely a year old. And then there was another interesting story about my grandfather's only sister. My great-grandfather had one daughter and 6 sons, and apparently this one lady chose to stay back in South Africa. So I'm growing up knowing that there is some part of me in South Africa, but no photographs, no connect for 2 or 3 generations, and all we had was one postal address. So it was an interesting family tree project. I would almost every year religiously write to that one address in Tongat. It's a neighborhood outside of Durban, and from where no reply ever came. And as I grew older and I shifted to the US in '98, with the access of internet, I started writing to some researchers in South Africa as to, I'm trying to find my roots, I want to know where my great-grandfather is. And one of the researchers said, Krishna, it's very difficult to get data about indenture coolies. And that was the first time I heard this word called indenture. And I looked it up online, and what I read shook me up. Between 1840 and 1970, you had 13 lakh Indians, 1.3 million Indians who are shipped off almost as quasi-slaves. They're sent off as sugarcane coolies to Mauritius, to Trinidad, Jamaica, South Africa, Fiji, and so on. And slavery ended in the British Empire in 1830s. So by that time, there was a lot of sugarcane grown in the Americas, the Caribbean, that part of the world. So the plantation owners, they demanded almost free labor. So then this whole system of indenture was designed. And thinking of it, complex supply chain, for people who are in this room around supply chain, think of 13 lakh coolies, 1840s, 1850s. How would you ship so many coolies? So there's an elaborate network of arkatis, a distorted word of recruiter. So the arkatis would go to smaller villages and towns, get hold of people who are looking healthy, energetic. You would get into a sub-depot till you have about 40, 50 people or 200, 300. Then you would go to a depot and then to the 2 ports, Calcutta and Madras, from where you've got the statistics, about 5.5 lakh people go to Caribbean and so on. As I'm reading this, then it struck me that great-grandfathers gone to South Africa, most likely 1880s, 1890s, and all this lines up. And this is one of a prominent photographs of indenture. And then it struck me that my great-grandfather was an indenture coolie. So I went and I prayed for him, and then now it was no longer a family tree or a family project. I was determined that I have to find him. The journey, the search for my roots took just about a couple of decades or more. It was a struggle to get hold of the ship list, the list of coolies who went from India to these different parts. And given the way the archives work in India today, you have very little digitization of the records. The ship list was all broken up, I get it together, and for the next few years, I almost memorized the 150,000 rows in this Excel sheet. I would subset them based on the timeline that my grandmother was saying that he most likely went to. I would pick the record, send it to my researcher friends. By this time, I spoke to almost all the researchers in South Africa, and they told me the problems like the coolies would change their name, their age, their caste when they landed. And think of, a coolie is on 4 months on a ship, and then when they land, it all depended upon the English officer, how he understood the name and so on. And I felt I had the Sisyphean curse, named after the Greek king Sisyphus, who has to roll the boulder all the way to the top of the mountain, and then it just comes back to where it started. So by 2014, I was exhausted because I had tried every known social media, every association in South Africa, and I gave up. And in 2014 December, I bought a 4-day ticket to South Africa, and my goal was only to stand on the same ground that my great-grandfather stood. So on day one, I'm in Durban, and it was very painful because I failed my ancestor. I couldn't find him. And on day two, I went to Pietermaritzburg, the place where Gandhiji was thrown off the train. That's the place where you have a fairly large archive, but it was Christmas Eve, and they were open only for a couple of hours. And then a divine miracle occurred. I found the original ship record of my great-grandfather. I cried, and I really can't explain that miracle as to how it happened. But I found it, and after 2 or 3 decades of search, I could complete the whole picture as to when was he born, when did he go, where did he work. So I completed the picture. I found my roots, and the following year, now the family tree is complete, all 7 generations. And for my father, I took him to South Africa and I showed him the farms where our journey began. So he met his first cousin, who are now both in their 70s. And after the miracle in Pietermaritzburg, I found my South African family as well. So they had this, in that 4 days, I find my family and my roots. And the families are reunited now after 3 or 4 generations of gap. And I thought I'll quickly take you through as to why did 13 lakh coolies have to get shipped. So I'll take just a minute for you to walk this through. Broadly, 3 things happening in history. One is around the sugar history itself. Second is around slavery, and something about India. Even before Christ, sugarcane was grown in India. But by 350 AD, when you had the Gupta dynasty, the golden age, we knew how to crystallize sugar. So amongst all the countries on the planet, India had this knowledge in 350 AD. But the action starts in 1441, when a Portuguese ship captain grabs 2 African sailors and he takes them as a gift to Portugal. That starts off the slavery race. And in 1493, Christopher Columbus took sugarcane to Hispaniola, which is now Haiti and Dominican Republic, the countries put together. That in a way started the whole sugarcane race in that part of the world. So 1493 is when the whole sugarcane race started. Till that time, this is an exotic spice reserved for the royalty. And in 1600, for the elites in Europe, it was fashionable to show off sugar sculpture. So Maria Medici married Henry IV, the King of France, in 1600. So the biggest thing they showed off was sugar sculptures at the wedding. At the same time, in India, the East India Company was trying to get permission from the Mughal Emperor to trade. In the meantime, sugar demand is growing because you have a lot more cultivation happening in Brazil and Jamaica and Barbados and so on. So between 1500 to 1800 is where we had got about 13 million slaves getting shipped off from Africa. And in 1757, the East India Company win a decisive war. They become more powerful in India. And in 1834 is where you had the middle class, which was consuming a lot more sugar, so demand is crazily high, the price is falling, and at the same time, slavery is abolished in the British Empire. So the plantation owners say, fine, you can take all the slaves away, but now give us free labor. So in the British Empire, in London, somebody figured out this whole indenture scheme, and the first ship carrying coolies went in 1860, called SS Truro. But the tragedy was in 1859, you had the Indian Titanic. You had a ship called Shah Alam carrying 400 indenture coolies and 75 crew members. The ship caught fire and it sank. All the 75 crew members were saved. Out of 400 coolies, guess how many coolies were saved?
Zero.
One. In that time, we had close to about 20% mortality rate on these ships, where they would pack 400, 500 coolies on an average 5 months across the ocean. These poor coolies wouldn't have a clue as to where are they going, how much would they get paid, and after such long journeys, once you land on the farm, you are locked up like a slave, and 5 years, 10 years, you just have to re-indenture year after year, and people would just die. And it is because of the hard work, more so about the female coolies. I mean, in all my other book readings, I say, I pray to these female coolies whose struggle was a lot more intense. I mean, they were harassed right from the depots to the farms and so on. It is because of them that you have about 45 lakh Indians in these countries today, from Jamaica, Guyana, Mauritius and so on. Some of the more famous ones, Alvin Karicharan, Sundar Popo, the god of chutney music. Please look up YouTube Sundar Popo. And on this journey, I was honored. So one more miracle is I got in touch with Uma Mistry. She is Mahatma Gandhi's great-granddaughter. She is a historian in Cape Town, South Africa, and she introduced me to few people at the archives and so on, and it was humbling. So I sent her the book, and she sent a nice feedback. And very few Indians are aware that Gandhiji's actual progeny, the real Gandhis, they do work in South Africa, they do real work, they live in South Africa. Starting from Manilal to Ella, who is a parliamentarian in South Africa, to Uma, who has lived all her life in Cape Town. And to close off, we don't learn from history. In the Middle East, you have the system of kafala, where millions of laborers, they work in 120-degree heat for 6 months in a year. The system works precisely like what it did with my great-grandfather 150 years ago. They are landing in a place where they don't have a clue about the language or food. They are not told precisely as to how much would they earn. They can't leave their employer, they can't leave the country, and then the way they live, they work, was just like indenture. People in Middle East today get killed. If you die, you are just a statistic. There are no official records about medical care and so on and so forth. So to leave a construction site in Dubai is exactly how it was for my great-grandfather, where the system of a pass, that to leave the farm you need a pass. To leave a construction site in Dubai, you need a pass. Why would a manager give you a pass to begin with? So a lot of coolies, even today in the Middle East, who are working 4 years, 5 years, and then the only time they escape is to get to the airport. So this is the tragedy that we are going through even as we speak. And Ashma, I just stick to time. So thank you. So the book is available online, and I'll be here for the rest of the day. So would love to answer.